Hey guys, Veebat here with another V Plays.
Hey, this is Postal Monkey.
Hey, and it's Evolution.
So, a while ago, the three of us, we actually built a video that was a tech tree showcase of the American Light Fighter line, and that was very well received by all of our viewers. So, we thought we'd do another showcase, and this time we're going to be looking at the German heavy fighters, which also features some very iconic aircraft as well. So to start things out, we've actually cut out the tier one. We're going to go straight into tier two, and we've each been assigned particular aircraft that we'll discuss a little bit, and then we'll let the other two kind of play in with what they wanted to be their takeaways from when they flew those airplanes. So I'm going to lead it off with Aviation with the.
Yeah, so the AO192, the German heavy at tier 2, it's obviously a pretty decent plane at that tier, and just correct me if I'm wrong, but there are no other heavies at tier 2 in the game, so
That's the one.
unless there's some premium ones that I'm not aware of, but having that honor, it's a pretty... Sorry? It's a pretty...
No, not even, there's another one.
No, yeah, so it's a pretty beastie plane. It's kind of in a class of its own. It's fairly average in performance specs, except for the pretty decent climbing capabilities. It's not exceptionally fast, and its guns, it's the only German heavy that doesn't have any cannons. So the only place it really does struggle is like when it's going up against, say, a tier 3 heavy. But apart from that, it's really, out and above on its own. And having the 4 little bombs also comes in really handy as well.
Yeah, I remember when I first flew this plane, which the German line was the first heavy line I went down. I remember I struggled so much with this plane until I realized, oh, you don't turn. You just go straight through and hit people and keep on going. Because right in the get-go from tier 2, you learn you've got to fly a heavy plane like a heavy plane. You can't fly it like a light fighter by any means.
Yeah.
So for me, this was like the first plane I flew. I pretty much flew the wings off of this thing, but this was pre 2.0. I flew this plane a lot in the closed beta because there were no bombers and I wanted to fly bombers. So this was the closest I could get. So I flew this thing around a lot just because I enjoyed the big, beefy hit point pool, the big engines, the ability to fly up at higher altitude, and I made a lot of the mistakes that I complain about now where people are flying too high to be effective. I did that in this plane. But I just loved it. It was so neat. Like, it was such a big plane, and it was able to get up there, and nobody could really touch you. And I'd wait for people to kind of stall out and I'd gun them down. It had a tail gunner, and it had bombs. So it was like, it had all these cool features. So between this and flying the tier 2 Russian ground attacker, those were my planes back in the day. I don't think I flew this post 2.0. Interesting fact though, if you look at this plane, if I'm not mistaken, this was a civil aircraft that was used as like one of their first like transport aircraft. Like people would fly in this thing to get around. And what I thought was neat about that is much like early like tall ship battles and stuff, like there wasn't ships built specifically for naval combat. There were merchant ships that were like retrofitted to be able to carry guns in time of war. And that's pretty much what happened with aviation in the initial phases. Like this plane wasn't meant for combat. They just put guns on it. You know what I mean? And I thought that was a cool little thing to bring up.
Shoots enemies during the day and transports customers during the night.
Yeah, like moves packages and dignitaries, so I thought that was a cool little thing.
It does look like they've literally just cut the tail gunner's turret out of the top of the fuselage there.
Yeah, very much.
I like early stage aviation, and since it's a mono wing, it's also fairly advanced for the time period. So I thought that was pretty. You guys want to move on to tier 3?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so this is my shameless plane, the Focke-Wulf 57. The thing has a roll rate that takes about a day and a half to do a full rotation at the wingtips, but it carries a lot of bombs, and I thought that that was the coolest thing when I first started flying these things, because it carries 6 bombs. Now, they take forever to reload. It's 300
it takes
seconds.
an age.
It is nuts, but for the initial phases of a battle, you can flip the first capture zone fairly quickly, and at like tier 4 and below, you're lucky if you have more than 4 zones to capture. Everything's a super slow biplane, so they can't get anywhere. So if you can flip a zone early, that's like a majority of the battle. The rest of it, you're just going to be fighting over that third one that's kind of in between the two. The other thing is, the reason I say this is totally unfair is because somebody who knows the game well enough and has been flying for a while, these dual 20s have the ability to hit people from ranges that no other guns can hit. The damage potential is so high that you can snipe out planes from forever away, and there's nothing they can do about it. And even though you're not fast, you're fast for the tier, and again, you have the altitude performance. And to add insult to injury, the tail gunner is a 20mm tail gunner, 20mm cannon. Like, you can wreck people's faces with this thing. And since it's only at tier 3, it's super easy to specialize, and now you're really just being a troll at low tiers. So I fly this to get the dailies done, but I feel bad doing it. If that makes any sense.
It does. Yeah, and this really is, I mean, a lot of people have the FW57 in their hangar, just because it is such a strong plane at this tier. And there's not many other tier 3 heavies in the game, I don't believe. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one.
There are not that many. There's a DOE 17 Z7, which is a premium.
And it's basically a bomber that acting like a heavy.
It has more of your BF 110 type guns. It's got 3 machine guns and a single 20, so it's a totally different setup.
It's a
this
huge
tends to be a go-to
plane.
tier 3 plane.
Yeah, it's huge. It's just flipping between them. It's monstrous.
Yeah. The tailplane just about takes up half your screen when you're flying the damn thing.
Yeah, I was just pulled up the 410, and the 410's about half the wingspan. It's kind of ludicrous. So, yeah, this is another one. I call it my flying greenhouse because of all that glass on the canopy and stuff. I'd hate to be receiving a shell in that friggin' glass cockpit. Don't throw rocks.
No.
You mentioned the glass cockpit. That tends to be a mainstay of this line. Once you get from this tier up to tier 6, at least there's quite a lot of glass on the cockpit for these planes.
And you know what though, it's actually a testament to the manufacturers as well. I mean, no one can claim the Germans didn't put too much effort didn't put enough effort into their aircraft. They put too much into their tech sometimes because they put so much glass on the thing. I can't imagine it was easy to mass produce a lot of these aircraft. So
yeah. It's definitely a quality over quantity kind of thing.
Absolutely. Without any further ado, let's move forward into the 110s because we got a lot of planes to cover. BF 110 at tier 4.
Yeah, that's the B, and I just bought this back actually. Unfortunately, a few weeks before March of Nations came through, where I could have gotten it on discount. And again, I first went down this line as my first heavy line, so this was probably like the end of 2017 or something like that. And this plane didn't quite stand out, but I didn't really know how to play the game then. When I bought it back this time, I realized immediately that this is really like a pocket ME410. And I know we're going to talk about the ME410 later, but this plane is really a very solid, very good all-around heavy plane. For its tier, it has exceptional gun power. You've got those 220s, you've got the 430 cals, you've got kind of a mediocre gunner, But you've also got a little bit of ground armament in those 2 bombs. They don't take 300 seconds, luckily. They take only 200 seconds. But they do 8,800 damage. You can get those dropped in the beginning there. But this plane is fairly quick for this tier. There are some other tier 4s at this point as far as heavies are concerned. But this plane stood out for me as being a really well-rounded heavy plane, a very strong platform for this tier. I really am glad that I was able to buy it back.
Yeah, that really starts to distinguish itself with these heavies.
It's such an iconic plane too. Like this is a major workhorse for the Germans during World War II, and along with the 109. So it's still, this is the first of the really iconic aircraft that people remember from this time period. I do think it feels like a downgrade coming from the Focke-Wulf 5.7 though, because yes, it has 20s, but it also has these 7.92s, and are they keeping up with the damage output that you're used to with the 5.7? And then you get this tail gunner that's a piddly 7.92, and it probably feels like a downgrade, and it feels like a downgrade with only 2 bombs now, but I think it's trying to shift your mindset a little bit more and get you more into the idea of you're going to be using a mixed gun loadout for a bit of the aircraft for the next few. And hopefully this is getting you prepared for dealing with those false hit indicators, as we like to call them.
Well, and I think that the balance of the 220s, for me, when I'm flying it, I like those machine guns just being able to be there, and I hate when you're attacking a plane and your 20s hit, but they leave it at like 7 hit points. When in a plane like this, you can just kind of hold down the trigger and you'll get that 7 hit points knocked down. And I think the 110, this initial 110 at tier 4, I think it kind of forces you to play a true heavy style. Whereas where the FW57, because you're a little bit lower and because you've got some flexibility with the plane, you can get away with not just boom and zoom. With the 110, it has a significant jump up in speed once you get to this tier. This plane has a jump up in speed, and you can utilize that to your advantage and really hit people and just keep on going and wait till you're 5,000 feet away and turn back around.
Yeah, that's where you really start to notice it is this tier and the tier 5 as well.
I feel like the early stage heavies, like their climb rates are so low.
Yeah.
That once you sacrifice that altitude to gain airspeed, you really pay for it because you got to struggle to climb back up, and you feel like you're just crawling for every foot or meter.
That is true. And their saving grace. I was just going to say that they do have a lot of boost timer, so that's kind of their one grace that you've got there. If you've got some boost saved up, you can use that to get going. But if you're already low and slow, just that boost is not a huge amount. It's not a very powerful boost. So yeah, you really got to have a bit of speed to go with it.
I guess one thing I'd offer people that feel like maybe they're getting a downgrade from the 5.7 is don't focus on the guns and the bombs. Focus on the engine power availability, because it's going to feel better to climb in this than it would in the 5.7 or even the AO. So it'll keep getting better as you go through, and I think we'll see that once we start talking about the tier 8 and up as well, that they got a lot of climb rate capability to get them out of those trouble spots.
And I do know that we're talking about the game aspect of it, but if you look at the tech tree portion of it, and if you look at the history of the BF-110, like Germany made this plane before World War II, and they tried to make a better heavy type plane throughout the war, and they could really never come up with something significantly better, or at least better enough to replace it, to the point where the BF-110 series was the mainstay for heavy planes throughout the war. That the 410 was kind of invented at the very end of the war, but too late. And they were trying to replace the 110, but the 110 is just a solid platform all around.
All right. So with that, do we want to talk about the 110 Echo? I know it's kind of just the next tier up in exchange, but maybe you got some extra tidbits to pull away from how this performs at tier 5, because I feel like it's a tier 5 changes some things gameplay wise.
Well, the speed is the I was going to say it's the most noticeable thing, but it's really kind of in step with the last couple of tiers, isn't it?
Well, I see the climb rate's higher too. Like you get a substantial climb rate increase, and that'll make the power feel like it's there. I've always kind of equated climb rate to acceleration characteristics as well.
Right. Because when you're trying to either catch something up high like a bomber or escape from a multi-roller or a fighter, that's where you want to go, is up.
Yep.
Well, and I like that. What I like about the Echo is you first get it, even once you upgrade it, you're like, okay, it kind of feels like the previous plane, but it is the previous plane, but everything's a little bit better about it, right? You've got the same guns, but they reach a little bit further. You've got the same layout as far as the engine and the plane style look, but it's a little bit faster. It does everything just a little bit better. It feels right in line with what if you learn to play the tier 4 well, then the tier 5 will feel like just a progression and an enjoyable progression of that. I don't remember what the reload time was on the bombs. Do either of you guys remember? Was it still 200 seconds?
Still 200, yeah.
Okay.
Which isn't great, like, yeah. I mean, a couple of 250s at tier 5 is okay. It's not like the 6 100s you get at tier 3.
Yeah, it still hasn't caught up with tier 3, huh?
No, it's a bit of an outlier. I was just saying, it's a bit of an oddity, that tier 3 bomb loadout.
Yeah, it's just different, and again, is it really that valuable with a 300-second reload? Like, it just turns into like a farce. Like,
yeah.
A lot of times I find myself stripping bombs off of planes, but those are internal carry on the 5.7, so it doesn't affect your airspeed. But on these, you're starting to add weight, you're starting to decrease your overall performance, because I believe these are external carry bombs, right?
They are.
Yeah. But at tier 5, I feel like you're hitting a different gambit, because at tier 4 you'll still come up against the Focke-Wulf 5.7s and stuff like that. But at tier 5, you're gonna start seeing some beefier planes, and I feel like you're going to be running into a lot more of those Spitfire type planes. You're gonna be hitting those the P-40s, the altitude fighters that are going to be able to intercept the aircraft, because there really wasn't much of any altitude fighters that could mess with your aircraft too much. But at this tier, you're heavy, which the main counter is an altitude fighter. You're going to start seeing more of those, and they're going to be that much more potential to be able to take you out. So you have to be more aware of your surroundings if you want to be effective once you get up to like tier 4, tier 5. And I think the 110s is when it's gonna make or break you, or hopefully just teach you that you need to keep your head on a swivel, and your energy is much more important.
That's for sure. Do you guys run with the bombs or without them? Because I kind of tried both, and I feel like the 110E is kind of an average performing plane, especially compared to which it starts to get some competition from the other nations at tier 5. And the speed advantage that you get just from keeping the bombs at home is not great. Do you guys run with them or not?
So I don't have these, but I could imagine I'd probably strip it down if I found I was having any issues with airspeed. So.
Well, I can say that tier 4 I kept the bombs on, but at tier 4 there wasn't a lot that could keep up with you. The quote-unquote jump that you get going to tier 5, I don't think it's a jump. I mean, there's movement as far as your airspeed's a little quicker, and altitude performance is a little bit higher. But V, you make a really good point that a lot of other nations get a little bit more significant of a jump when it comes to their light fighter performance. The P-40 can go pretty high compared to the P-36 kind of situation. Suddenly you've got the P-38s that you didn't have to deal with at Tier 4. There's some other, there's like the key at Tier 5 can get up pretty high too. So where you kind of felt like you, I don't want to say you owned the sky at Tier 4, but you definitely felt like you had a place at Tier 4. At Tier 5, I think it gets a little bit muddled and it starts to get lost.
Because that's where it's kind of an interesting trade-off, like keeping the bombs or not, because I noticed the P-38s had no trouble keeping up with me, and then it becomes a question of, well, am I better off having some extra capping capabilities, or do I try and squeeze out that speed and just stay sort of smooth and fast? It's an interesting choice.
It's always a tough argument because I used to be of the mindset of, well, if they're giving me bombs, I'm going to put bombs on because I like explosions. And
Boom.
yeah, right. So I would always keep them on, but I started to learn like the P-38. Like if the P-38 can outpace me and he can outmaneuver me, guess who I just avoided? You know what I mean? And now that you can queue allies, you can queue the bots to attack things. I'll send them at the P-38 and I'll make a gunning pass and then I'll straighten it out for my bots to go shoot it down. You know, like there are things you can do. It's more the aspect of if you have a higher base airspeed because you don't carry the bombs, and then you get a higher boosted airspeed as a result of not carrying the bombs, you've increased your average speed by 10, 15 miles an hour or kilometers or whatever. But my point is that it doesn't seem like much, but I feel like it probably adds up in the long run, especially just for the climate. Not to beat a P-38F, because that's not going to happen. But what you can do is you can beat out maybe that ambitious multi-role that thinks he can come get you in his Corsair or something, you know what I mean? And that's where I think it kind of comes into a discussion of the bombs may be the make and break point, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you could get away with them a lot easier at Tier 4 or Tier 5, but it's definitely a discussion point, and I think it's one of those things that different playstyles will dictate if you keep the bombs on or take the bombs off. But in most standpoints up to Tier 5, it probably wouldn't be best to keep them on.
All right, moving on.
Sure.
ME410, or arguably actually the ME210 Plus. So little history that I got when I started digging around, because when they offered me the 210, I'm like, what the hell is this? We got a 410. What's the difference? They look nearly identical. The problem with the 210 is because it's got that snubbed nose and that big cockpit, it actually caused some issues with the airflow over the vertical stabilizers. So if you don't have like your rudder fin isn't getting enough airflow, it makes it so it doesn't keep your back end straight. It starts sliding, like as though you were driving down the road and you started hydroplaning. It starts skidding from side to side, and it was very unsettling. And it wasn't. Well, it's also not good because you can kind of get yourself into like a lateral stall or whatever you might call that, like kind of this weird auto yawing. So I don't think it was nearly as bad as some pilots reported it, because, you know, rumors are rumors and it just gets worse and snowballs. So the 210, like pilots, it got a really bad reputation. It made its way through the ranks. People did not like the 210. Well, the 410 was like an attempt to kind of fix some of those issues and some modifications to the airframe. So it got a better vertical stabilizer, better airflow. But since crews hated the 210, they changed the designation to the 410, so it's a completely different number, so it's a completely different airplane, because not everybody saw the 210, they just heard about the 210. So when you started fielding the 410, it would have a better reception, hopefully. So I thought that was a funny little tidbit of history on this thing. But to talk about the 410 in game, the 410 is when you get your true harmonica gun system, as I call it, because you've got 30s, 20s, and 13 millimeter machine guns. It's just a whole bunch of different guns. And I had the hardest time initially flying this thing because I'm like, there's so many different guns, none of them are all hitting at the same time. Well, that's only true if somebody's coming across your field of view like there's really high departure angle. But if you settle in right behind somebody or even in a head-on, all of those guns are going to hit. And the closer you get, the more they overlap with their shell velocities and ranges. So there's a huge amount of damage potential from this thing because it has like over 600 cumulative damage. Well, I think it has about 600 cumulative damage. I have gas operated action on here, but it can be a very dangerous and nasty plane, and that's one of the things I started to appreciate when I went back and rebought it, because I think I learned how to play heavies well enough that it felt really good. There are some weird options for what you can do for loadouts with this, because there is an option to carry 2 bombs internally on this, but you sacrifice the 2 30mm cannon mounts. I have heard of people removing the 30s and just going with the 20s that you can put in its place as well. So you can have 4 20s and 2 7.92 machine guns. Sorry, I said 13mm. They're 7.92s. But people did that because it was more consistent firepower. I like going with a max damage output. The 30s reach out a little bit further. When you're going up against a bomber, they really do sync up a lot better. I do carry the air-to-ground ordnance. It's 4 of those big honking rockets that the Germans get. They actually do quite a bit more damage than the 5-inch rockets do on their own for the Americans and stuff. So I like those. But I found, and I did a video on this, that if you fire these guns, I used to say aim with your biggest caliber gun, but lately I've been aiming and I've been pulling lead, like mentally in my head, pulling the lead equivalent for the 20mm cannons, and that gave me enough variance in the front and back end for my lead that I was always having something hit. And then as I got closer and all those guns kind of converged, machine guns were hitting in the front of the aircraft, 20s were hitting mid-body, and the 30s were hitting in the tail. Like, I was starting to really crush people. And it was nice to see that damage kind of slowly start piling up and then exponentially increase as you close the distance, and the plane just boom, gone. And it's a really pretty looking plane, and I really enjoyed it. It's so sleek. It's just like someone took the 110 and went, you know what, let's make it look really cool. And it does, so.
That bubble canopy really sells it, doesn't it?
It totally does, right? But apparently it didn't help with aerodynamic characteristics because of that shape, so I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Wow.
I'm sure a history buff's going to correct me on some of my misconceptions. Like, I probably got something wrong here, but what do you guys think?
You wouldn't be Veebat if that didn't happen, right?
and I'd love to hear in the comments if somebody had some more info to offer, because I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to perpetuate a falsehood, but if I'm right, I would like validation too, so that would be cool. I like the historical discussions, so.
Yeah, I've heard of people putting, so when you specialize this plane, like, you have to have the 30s and you have to have the rockets. And I've specialized mine, and honestly, I couldn't imagine having it with the 20s. I could understand consistency, and what's funny about that is we'll discuss that in the future down this line, but the 30s on this plane do literally twice as much damage each as the 20s. And yeah, the 20s reach out a little bit further, and okay, you get a little bit of consistency, but when the 30s hit, I mean, they just shave chunks of hit points off of whatever you're shooting at.
Yeah, they wreck.
You feel like they do, and you can take out bombers, you can take out GAs, you can take out light fighters in one pass, multi-rolls in one pass. You make heavy fighters regret their decisions in one pass. And it's, I mean, yeah, you've got to work a little bit harder to get the 30s to work, but you want the 30s, because when they work, I think is how they say that. But you also, like, this gun setup is very similar it's a similar style to a lot of the other German planes. Some of the light fighters have one heavy cannon and a couple of 20s and a couple of 30 cals. Some of the higher tier planes on the Germans, like the FW-190s and things of that nature, have like different setups of the guns, and there's a nuance to them, but if you can work with that, you can really make it sing, and you can feel comfortable in any situation because you've got guns that you don't necessarily need to hit with the 30s if you only need to take off 50 hit points. Don't worry about the 30s. You fire the 20s and the 30 cals.
Yeah.
You've got a gun for every situation, and that's what I like about it.
I thought that there's quite a difference between the 410 and the 110E, and I actually haven't spent a lot of time in this plane. I haven't got it specialized, but I remember flying this plane and thinking, wow, this thing has got a lot of potential. I had some really high-scoring games in it. I was actually in a big rush to get to the 109Z, so I kind of didn't give it the time that it deserves. I'll probably go back and play it a lot more. But I do recall those, when you got all those guns synced up, like you say, it was just devastating, and it's the difference between one pass and two. Like, you can just, you don't have to turn around with this thing. It just leaves devastation in its wake. The other big difference is the field of fire of the turrets, being that turret guns on this plane are mounted on the side and able to shoot below you and out to the sides rather than the traditional sort of up and back from all the other ones preceding it. So it does make it a bit easier, I feel, to get away, to make the decision of which direction you want to go, whereas the other ones you've really got to be climbing to utilize the turret.
They also look very cool.
They do. They look very, like almost futuristic, right? But you make a good point. I hadn't really thought about that. And one of the more frustrating things about some of the tail gunners is the fact that you're like, well, that plane's below the horizon. I can't do anything about it with my tail gunner. I guess I'll just light up a cigarette back there. But with the tail gunner on this plane, you really do have some flexibility.
Yeah, it's nice.
All right, so you mentioned it, so we'll move on to it. The 109Z, I believe Postal, that was your plane.
It was, and everything that you've just learned about all the planes leading up to this plane get totally thrown out the window because you've got no tail gunner. It looks completely different. It's based on the BF-109s and basically fused together two fuselages. And unlike some of the American concepts of dual fuselage, fighters being stuck together, this plane you can only have the pilot in one of the fuselages. They actually covered up the other fuselage, which I would think from just like trying to fool the enemy kind of thing, you'd want both of them to look like a pilot could be in it. But hey, who am I? But I remember when I first got this plane, and I remember going down this line, and the ME-410 was the first plane that I went down that I really was like, okay, I can see the potential of this line. And of course, then you get to this plane. But I did quite enjoy this plane. I bought it back, and I really, really enjoy it now that I've bought it back. And what I like about the plane is, well, we've talked about the 30s previous to this. On this plane, you've got quite a lot of options, actually. It does come with a 250-pound bomb, which we've talked about having bombs on the, having a bomb on a heavy or not having a bomb on a heavy. On this particular plane, it's one bomb. And, the damage potential is pretty minimal, especially now that you're at Tier 7. You're only doing 4,400, so you really don't see a whole lot of people with the bomb on there, and I don't keep the bomb on here either. because you're at tier 7, you've got to deal with some tier 8s, and you got to deal with a lot of those jets. In my opinion, you want to keep as much speed as you can.
Yeah.
But this plane's really good at its airspeed. It's really good at if you're not turning too much, you're able to keep that airspeed. What I have noticed is if you start to turn, it does start to bleed its airspeed quite a bit. But what I like about it is that you can make it your own. If it's fully spec'd, quote unquote, you have 4 30mm cannons, which are the same 30 mils that you had on the ME-410. They're Mark 108s or MK 108s, my bad. You've got 4 of them, so they put out quite a big spray. But if you want, you can put, 2 20s and 2 30s, and have those 2 20s that people might like for more consistency that reach out to about 2,600 feet, and still do 110 damage per second, and then keep 2 30s that do 180 damage per second, and then have a much less effective firing range of about 1,900 feet. I was so excited when I bought this plane back. I was just super hyped. I bought it back, put the paint on it because God knows I can't fly anything without paint. Hopped in it, threw a 1-point pilot in it, and hopped in the game, and then realized, oh crap, I forgot to upgrade my engine at all, and I've only got 2 20mm cannons on it. But it performed. They're the hub-mounted 20 mils because that's what you start off with. But just with those 2 hub-mounted 20 mils, I was able to get a wing legend, and you were able to do what you need to do in this plane. Since adding the 30mm cannons onto it, and that's how I fly it, is 2 20s on the hub and 2 30s on the outboard weapon. But most people will play it with the 30s. You've got that flexibility with the plane, which I really like, and it didn't. When I first went down the line, it didn't really dawn on me that you've got that flexibility to match your play style. And that's something I really like about this plane that I don't really hear about very often.
Yeah, I was in a big hurry to get to this plane just because it's so different, especially to the other heavies in that line, and I find it actually quite challenging to fly, especially because you want to fly it more boom and zoom, and a bit of high altitude dogfighting as well. It does perform well at the altitude, but it's certainly let down by its roll rate and its turn rate. So it can be tricky. But obviously having those quad 30s is just absolutely devastating once you get those all to line up. They're pretty loosely aligned, so it can take a bit of specializing to get them to all go in the same direction.
It's like a shotgun.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
Kapoof, kapoof, kapoof.
Yeah, it's a street sweeper.
So, the guns. It's the guns. The good thing though is that if you get used to them here, it only gets better because then you get centrally mounted 30s, but you're still getting 30s, and it's been a reoccurring theme throughout this game, and I think we can all attest to it based on like the comments and stuff that we get in our videos, especially when we do an aircraft with 30s, is that people don't like them. They like the idea of 30s, but when you are using 30s, they have a slower rate of fire. These ones have a pretty short range.
Yes, they do.
And they overheat fairly quickly. Now, they hit like a Mack truck when they make contact, but if you got any type of weird little server lag, the shell decides that it wants to go wide, it punishes you so much more than if you had 20s, because the 20s are that nice mix between the machine guns and the 30s. They got good damage, they got good rate of fire, they got good range, and they cool down fast if you overheat them. But with the 30s, man, you either hit or you're cursing your existence. But the 109Z I hated, and I could not wait to get out of it. And way back in the day when Slay was still making videos and I was watching him play it, he goes, you know, he goes, I really like the 109Z. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, I'm flying that thing right now and I hate it. And he goes, figure out the guns here, because if you can't figure them out, you're not going to like the rest of the rest of the line here. And I took the time, and it unfortunately, it wasn't until I was at the end of the grind that I was like, I had some really good games in it, and it just crushed things because I was going after the right planes. I was making sure I was vectoring in on stern conversion, so I wasn't getting like in these high departure shots where a plane's going exactly across my field of view, and I'm trying to yank the freaking control yoke. Like, you're not going to get them. It's a heavy, right? So it starts to get your head wrapped around the idea of like that gingerly, like sloping movement that I think we'll talk about when we start getting into the 262s and stuff. But you got to be very like fluid in your movements because you don't want to lose. Yeah, very deliberate, fluid. If you're yanking your mouse all the way over and you're like turn, that's not what you should have been doing. You were in the wrong spot. You put yourself in the wrong spot. You always have to plan for not getting the kill. You always have to plan for missing, and always have an exit strategy. And that plane is like the barrier to entry. If you can't figure it out in the 109Z, you're probably going to have a really tough time in the 262. You might stick it out and learn it in the 262, but it's not going to be easy. So,
well, and some other similarities between this and the tiers above it that I'm not sure a lot of people catch on to is the hit points on this plane are actually less than the tier 6 version. And the hit points for each of the tiers above this are less than all the other heavy fighters, you know, comparable 8, 9s, and 10s. I equate it to this being a BF-109Z technically, and that's probably why the hit points are less, and that's why the boost is less on these particular planes as well. But it is in line with, from the guns to the hit points comparatively to the play style that you play on the 262 and above. It really does. You're exactly right. It builds you for that going forward.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because it's certainly got plenty of surface area, like with the broad wing and dual fuselage. So it's not exactly a hard plane to hit if you're not going fast enough. So you really got to capitalize on that speed.
Mm-hmm.
all right, so you guys brought it up. Might as well jump into it. And
I'm great with segues, V.
Yeah, well, I'm thankful that you guys let me do this plane because I wanted to buy this back for this video because it's the only 262 I don't have, so I bought it back and I remembered it being a neat plane. Just needed the credits, so I moved on. But this plane sucks for grinding. It's true for a lot of the German line. A lot of the German line, it's like, I got all new engines, all new guns. I got to get a fuselage to even get the next set of guns because on this plane stock, you only get 230s again. You're like, wait, what? Why am I being punished for unlocking the next plane? It should be better. And I have to unlock not one, not two, but 3 engine upgrades if I want to get the full potential. So I got to get the airframe. Then I got to get the guns. This is the order I suggest, by the way, guys. Get the airframe, then get the 4 guns, then get all of the engines. Don't put any bombs, any rockets, nothing on this thing, because without the engine power, you're going to be a sitting duck and you're going to hate your life. But if you stick with it and you keep this plane and you decide that you're going to go forward and specialize it, which I plan to do at some point, it seems weird when you're looking at the engine tree because you got Jumo, BMW 003A, Jumo 004B, and then you got this thing that looks like a weird rocket engine, and it says Hawk 509.
Mm-hmm.
You still are getting the Jumo 004Bs when you upgrade to that, but it's they shoehorn in there a rocket engine into the tail, and people don't talk about this. They don't talk about it during the upgrades or the reviews. It has a rocket engine. So when we start talking about climb performance, how the climb performance steadily gets better from tier 2 all the way up, this thing has a climb rate with my current configuration of 500 feet a second because it has a rocket motor in its butt. The thing's nuts, and I have the air-to-air rockets mounted on the wings. This is
Yeah.
also the first plane where you're going to be getting air-to-air rockets on your 262s, and you're going to be like, whoa, I have air-to-air rockets in my heavy plane. So now when you get stuck in a head-on with another heavy or any other plane, you can just dab that R key, which, by the way, you should fire all of them anytime you're in a situation.
Yeah.
These do not have the oomph of the 94D, but yeah, you unload them all. But these 30s are the same 30s from the 109 set, so they're really slow velocity. I feel like you're throwing like a handful of rocks. Like you ever throw a handful of rocks into the water as a kid, and you're like, "Klunk, klunk, klunk." You're like, you could barely hit the broadside of a barn sometimes.
That
Like
was
it
less
just,
impressive than I thought it'd be.
yeah, you're like, I thought that would be fun. But it's these like softballs you're just kind of throwing and lobbing out in the sky, and you're like, I really hope that hits something. But if you use the speed, you use the surprise element of being so fast. Like people look at the mini map and they're like, oh, there's a heavy, but he's like a zone away. Oh geez, he's here, and you're unloading these 30s. And if you get into this plane, and this is the first production jet fighter in the world, it's super iconic. It's really neat. I wanted it back in my hangar for that purpose, but it is the beginning of the greatness that is the rest of the line. So, thoughts on 262 at tier 8, guys?
Well, I know we talked a little bit about the similarities between the 109Z and this plane. It's got the same 30s, although I think the 30s on this have like just a little bit more range. It's got the same kind of play style it builds in there, but there's so many more differences between the two. This is the first tier 8 heavy fighter I ever got. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I think I got the 430s first, though. I don't think I got the rocket engine till near the end, and I was so glad to be done with this plane. In fact, I didn't like this plane so much that I just stopped grinding for like 4 months on it. And then when I got the HG2, I wasn't setting myself up for any excitement on that one. But that being said, I would like to go back and buy this now because I know what a rocket can do with a plane. Now that I've seen, again, this is the first tier 8 heavy that I ever had. So like, what did jets do? Now that you see what that extra boost can do for you, and at tier 8, I mean, as far as this tech tree plane is concerned, there's nothing else like this. A 1056 is the other heavy jet-powered plane in the game, and it is not a 262 as far as get up and go is concerned, right? This thing is so unique. It has so much potential. I get excited about it, even though I hated it when I first played it. I get excited about the thought of getting it back and stomping on those tier 7s, basically.
Yeah. Well, that's my first memory of this plane, is not flying it, but getting absolutely wrecked by a good pilot. And I can remember sitting there after the defeat and just thinking, what the hell am I supposed to do about that? Like, what can you do? It's just ridiculous. And really, the only thing you can do is keep an eye on that map and make sure you don't get lined up by it, because if you do, you're toast. Like, it's just ridiculous. It's a super powerful plane. It's amazing.
Well, it is a super powerful plane, but it needs to be played right. Like we're talking about it as like it's got a halo on it, and it's just this undefeatable beast. But the range of those 30 mils, so short. If you're not playing it right, if you're not leading properly, if you're not paying attention to what you're attacking, you're going to be completely ineffective. Great, you're going to be a rocket, but you're not going to hit anything. So you need to have the right tactic when it comes to the angle. You need to have the right tactic as far as your escape route is concerned, because you're not going to out-turn anything. I didn't look it up, but I'm willing to bet this is one of the least maneuverable tier 8 planes in the game.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not great. It's not bad though. The thing is, I think this may be a good candidate for a G suit, although I don't think it's an option, because you're always above your threshold for speed. Oh, it can get a G
It
suit.
can get a G suit.
Yeah.
It's always above your threshold for maneuverability because it actually has a better maneuverability than its predecessors. It's got a 14.9 second turn time because I don't have any turn mods on it, but when you're covering that much space in that amount of time, you're like, yeah, sure, you can make that turn, but you're doing it around the perimeter of an entire capture zone because it's just
you're going
so
500 some miles
fast.
an hour.
Yeah, I'd be like, yeah, you can do it in 15 seconds, but you're going to be taking a whole city block to do the dang thing. Like, it's just like turning a friggin' school bus. On top of that, this is the first time that I felt like I was flying a heavy in this line, if that makes sense. Like, I really felt, yeah, I felt it in the 410, I felt it in the 5.7, but this felt like a very substantial airplane. The hits that it can have, the speed at which it flies, the deliberate nature of being up at altitude, and kind of reminded me of like all those old like 70s movies, like, you know, like Iron Eagle and stuff, where you're flying and you're like, you look out the window, you're like, target, you know, X number of miles away, you know, off my beam, and then you're like rolling in, and you're like roll the plane in like you're something out of Top Gun. You're like, you assess the target, you line it up, you got to get the shot right. You're like lining in. I'm going in for guns, and you like line it up and you make the attack run, and you have to be so deliberate in it. And I love that. It just feels that visceral like era of jet flight.
Yeah.
And you are right, the 30s are different. They do 10 less damage compared to the Z, and they have slightly less range, believe it or not. So, for the Zs. So,
There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
slightly less.
It's got.
Slightly-
It's got.
no. So this has greater range and greater damage than the Z. So, sorry,
Okay.
I said that oddly. My point is, you are still getting a nice gun upgrade. You're not getting the exact same gun. So,
Yeah.
it's keeping
same-
pace with the tier.
Correct.
Or-
Exactly. Yeah, it's the same style as far as like the lobbing shells kind of thing is concerned. But
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it's a little bit easier to shoot with, being that you've got 4 in the nose, and I feel like it must have a better rate of fire too than the 109.
I'm gonna have to fact check that. Fact checking. The rate of fire of this plane, 240 rounds per minute. On the 1944 variant, which is on the
it's
262?
240 on the Z.
yeah. So they're the same. It
Okay,
probably
it's
just
the
feels
same.
different because you get shotgun spread.
Yeah, and
There
The
may
pipe-
be a cooldown rate that we're not seeing as well, like overheat rate, cooldown rate. You know what I
Right.
mean, like the burst
Yeah,
length, because
I
those are
always
the
wonder
soft
that.
stats.
Yeah, because you see, I feel like you see that quite a bit throughout the game in different tier to tier when you go to the next level. If it's the same exact gun, maybe it's a placebo effect in my head where I'm like, of course, it should be a quicker cooldown rate, but I do feel like it does cool down a little bit.
All right, HG2, tier 9. I think that was you, Avalation.
yeah, that's me. I mean, everything you like about the original 262, you just gonna love about the HG2. It's again just an absolutely devastating plane. I really don't know what else to say about it than that, because it's like, to me, it's almost a bully in the sky. Like, it's just ridiculous. I've been flying mine with the bombs on it. You get a couple of 250s, and if you need to go and help out at that mining facility, you can. Like, it does everything really well. It's gonna terrorize the ground pounders. It's gonna terrorize the bombers. It's gonna compete with the other heavies, and it's got the speed to mess with the fighters as well. Like, it's an all-round beast.
This is the first one, and I think this is this is the first aircraft in the entire line that you're getting. You get those bombs and you get the air-to-air rockets. You can do
Mhm.
both. You don't have to choose. And these are the 30s that you get at tier 10. They're the same 30s. They're an upgraded 30. They do more damage. They do
Yeah.
350 damage a second,
Mhm.
330 rounds a minute. So that's a decent increase in volume of fire because we mentioned that being an issue. And they actually fire out further, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're doing these run-ins at high speed, you almost need to take a couple ranging shots just to make sure you're
Yeah.
lined up properly,
Yep.
Just
and
to get your
you just
traces
hold
out.
down that mouse button. But
Yeah.
if you only have a half second of fire time because you're right past him, this does have the volume of fire to make that happen. And since you're getting used to these guns, then it'll really help you when you get to the next one. But before we get ahead of ourselves, Postal.
It's funny that you mentioned that tactic of half-second burst. Like in real life, did a little bit of research on not this plane, but the previous plane. The tactic was to, because you had to get so close to it, was to come in at an angle and just fire a spread of these 30 mil cannons. And it's very much a tactic that you use at tier 8, tier 9, and tier 10 to varying degrees as you get higher and faster. But as much as I disliked the tier 8 262 when I first used it, I absolutely loved the tier 9 262. And I think it equates to a lot of it has to do with these guns. And you mentioned it, V, that it's just it seems on paper like, okay, you get an extra 120 feet, you know, but the combination of that on the range, the rate of fire being a decent amount, 50 more rounds a no, almost 90 rounds a minute. And then
Yep.
that damage per second. There'd be times when I'd fly it and I would just laugh at planes just going from, over 1,000 HP, some of those bombers to nothing pretty quickly. I fell in love with this plane probably like 2 games into it, 3 games into it. I think V might have been on the receiving end of the game that made me fall in love with this plane. But
Most likely.
the airspeed was just so good on it. As much as the normal the tier 8 had airspeed, the tier 9 just, it's even faster, and this, like, everything's a blur almost. It's just standing still, and woe unto the tier 8s that run into you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it, Abel, that it's got the combination of the bombs and the rockets, and it is nice to be able to. I kept the bombs on mine to be able to just throw them down, and you've got they don't impact the airspeed so much because your airspeed is so significant, and still have those air-to-air rockets and punch people in the face kind of thing. What it's got okay rate of climb, and it's not like terrible, but it's not.
It's actually slightly less than the tier 8 because of that rocket engine.
And I'm sure that's exactly what it is. But in a straight line, and going is concerned, without the boost, so to speak,
Yeah.
the HG2 just felt so comfortable. And once you really lock into the true boom and zoom, like this thing booms and this thing zooms, and don't dogfight anybody, but otherwise you're gonna just have a blast. No pun intended.
And this plane, I will describe this plane, when you upgrade it to the next airframe, it ditches the standard T-tail of the 262 and gets like a V-tail.
Yeah.
Oh, why do I like that?
Cool.
This is a sexy plane.
Is it the only
Yeah.
plane in the game with a V tailplane?
I don't know if it is.
The tier 10's got it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, but how can you go wrong with a V-tail?
With a V anything, I'm quite sure.
And I can't see the tech tree for the grind, but I have reason to believe you have engines unlocked at this point, and it's also unlocking engines for like the 1101 and the 1092. Well, you don't need them for the 1101, but for like the 1092, it's unlocking for the BVPs. Like you're unlocking things with this plane.
TA 183.
Yep. So you're not struggling like you were with a 262 as much, because I also don't think you need to do an airframe upgrade to get 4 guns either.
Nope.
So you kind of yeah, I have it specialized, so I don't get to see that. Speaking of that, if you specialize it, my cruise speed surpasses the cruise speed of the tier 10. By the way,
Oh, that's crazy.
it is absolutely nuts. I don't beat it for boost, but I
Wow.
beat it for cruise speed. It is this thing. It's true. You add about a tier to a tier and a half when you specialize and you like ultimate in aircraft. You're essentially playing at a different tier bracket. So
Oh,
it is. This thing is a monster. It is. I do not fear getting into a tier 10 match with this plane.
nice. Yeah,
Anyways,
like I said, I've got no complaints about the tier 9.
so
Wouldn't dare.
Aviation, do you have the tier 10 yet or no?
I do not. No.
So
Very
with
much
that,
looking forward to it.
I will let Postal tease you as we move on to the
So you mentioned how good the tier 9 looks once you get it fully upgraded. The tier 10 looks like it's a freaking UFO, like in a good way. It looks so futuristic the way the engines are set into the wing
Yeah.
themselves. You've got that V-tail on it as well. It just looks like it could have been like couldn't have possibly been on paper in 1945. This would be something that could have been made in the 70s. Um, so if you go in line and you go from tier 8 to tier 9 to tier 10, as you learn those tactics, they just seamlessly move on to this tier 10. And there are some complaints about the plane, and I'll address those right away, in the fact that you lose the air-to-air rockets. And I can understand why, if you're used to them at tier 8, blast planes in the face with those rockets. The only option you have on the tier 10 is the bombs. But for me, I don't even set it up with the bombs. I keep the bombs off, and I just set this up as a speed demon. I don't have it specialized, but I have my airspeed as good as it can be, even not specialized, because I've put the improved uprated engine on it. If you put the bombs on it, you're going to be slowed down a little bit, and you don't need the air-to-air rockets, in my opinion, because you're going so fast. You can dictate your angle of attack, because quite often in an instant, I'm coming at the wrong angle. Okay, I'll turn this way, give myself 10 seconds, turn back around, and come at the angle that I want to come at. And so I don't need to worry about head-ons. I can make sure the angle of engagement is exactly what I need it to be. With this, they're the same guns that you had at tier 9, but that just speaks to the strength that they were at tier 9, because you are doing that 350 damage per second. You've got the 330 rounds a minute, and you've got the about 2,300 foot firing range. This plane is so quick. This plane has great altitude performance, and I just feel like at any given time, I can be where I need to be. If there's an issue on the other side of the map, okay, I can be there. And yeah, it's not. I know there's a lot of comparison between this things like the XF90 that is faster than it, but it's not that much faster than it. And these guns make a huge difference. You were speaking about it probably at tier 6. If you can learn how to use 30 mil cannons, that can be super detrimental. I compare it to, if you've ever played World of Tanks, the 122 millimeter cannons on like the Russian tanks are kind of the derpy, but everybody loves them because when you hit, you got that ability to really take off chunks of hit points, compared to things like 105 mil cannons on some of the other tanks. That's the comparison I make with these. The 30 mil cannons compared to the 20 mil cannons, these just melt planes. An EF-1, 131, things like that, an Su-10. You can do a heck of a lot of damage to those high-tier bombers, those high-tier ground attack planes, those other heavy fighters. And you are so quick that if you're doing a true boom and zoom, you're hitting them and you're gone before they even really have a chance to react. You force the enemy to be paying attention to the map as much as they're paying attention to the plane in front of them, because if they don't, you can make them regret it.
Wowee.
So if that doesn't hype you up for it.
Yeah, it seems like just a dominating force, especially at tier 10. I am surprised that they excluded the rockets. I'm guessing that's more because it would have been too overpowered to let it have rockets as well.
Mayhap. I don't think they're the only other plane. The only plane at tier 10 that has air-to-air rockets is the BVP 215, and arguably you could say the Hunter because those air-to-ground rockets kind
Yeah.
of dual role. But I don't think it needs them. I
Right.
don't think it really. Nobody's heading on. There's very seldom are you heading on anybody. Like it's not really a thing. What I like about this plane is it's actually on par for the most maneuverable heavy finally. Like it's got the same turn time as the Javelin. It has the lowest altitude performance of the heavies, but what it's got good airspeed. It's
Yeah.
got good climb rate. It has stellar firepower. It's the same type of firepower you get in the Javelin, and arguably I'd like to think that this is actually going to be more accurate because the Javelin's guns are wing mounted. These are not.
Right.
They're in the hull. Also, the Javelin gets no air to ground ordnance. This thing gets those two bombs, and somebody might be thinking, well, you're sacrificing airspeed, and it's mostly me. But it wasn't until now when we were talking, I looked at the reload. The reload's only 120 seconds. With how much I've been flying multi-rolls lately, I know now that that is actually right on par with the multi-roll reload time. That's a good reload time. It makes sense to carry those bombs.
Yeah, they do a decent amount of damage, 10,000 damage.
Oh yeah, I would drop them both on whatever, and I would just keep moving, and it it can be awesome. I haven't messed with it because I like to make sure I understand everything first before I start monkeying with setups. But I'm willing to bet that Raptor Strike would be a really good option for some of these 262s. The ability to dive down, like maybe
Mm-hmm.
maybe set it up as more of a stealth build because the worst thing that can happen is an aircraft knows you're coming and they maneuver. But
Yes.
if they can't see you and you dive on them, you can go in there after that Yak 30 and you're like, I don't care. He's barely moving. He might as well be sitting still compared to me. And bop 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 bop. But I think it needs more testing. You're right. The thing looks like it's out of a friggin' space age movie. When I looked at the picture in the diagram, like you only get the picture. You don't get to like spin it around in your hangar like you do like with World of Warships or even World of Tanks. You have to like go off of the picture, and the picture I was like, that thing looks ugly. It looks really stout and ugly,
Mm-hmm.
but guys, it's long. It's long. It's sleek. It's flatter than it looks. It's not fat. It just looks like a more futuristic version of a 262, which is what they were. They were like, if the war was to keep going, this is eventually what the 262 would theoretically be. And it was even beyond its time when it didn't exist. Because how long did it take before we figured out swept wings was the right way to go on jet fighters?
Right.
This already had it on paper. It had it with the HG2, it had it with the HG3. They already knew. It's just a glorious plane, and I have not been disappointed with any of the tier 10 heavy planes. I think that they're all great planes, and you're so set up for it. You're so set up for success after flying the 262s all the way up.
Yep. Yeah, that's what I agree with your. All the tier 10s or heavies are really good. And this was unique to them because, like you said, you've got the bombs if you want to have the bombs. It doesn't have the best altitude performance, but it also retains its speed really well. It's something that I was paying attention to the last few times I was flying it. Yeah, you start hitting the yellow, I think at like 9,000 feet or something like that. Let me double check here, 9,200 feet.
What is that though?
But I mean, I'm up to 12,000 feet, and whenever I want to be, just because you've already learned the tactic of you're not turning, you're not up at 10,000 feet trying to dogfight somebody. So you're retaining that speed and you're getting up really high. And it doesn't matter that that you're in the yellow or in the red up there because you're still flying, like a bat out of hell.
Yep.
Yeah, so you're gonna love it, Abel.
Yeah, I'm definitely sold on it. That's a pretty convincing pitch.
It's the credits. It's the credits and the time, though. That's what gets you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth the grind though for sure.
Yeah.
So we've talked about all the aircraft, but if you were to put a bow on it, how would you describe the German heavy line to somebody that's like, well, I was thinking about going down one of the heavy lines? How would you sell the German heavy line, or how would you describe it accurately so that way somebody knew what they were getting into?
Ooh, that's a good question that I wasn't quite prepared for.
Yeah. Um,
Uh,
oof.
I'll offer one. Um, it is a very iconic line that if you put the time and effort into it, it'll reward you. Um, but the grind is going to take some dedication and time in order to get you there. It is not an easy button, but it is worth the effort. And that's how I think I would describe this line.
I think I would say that learning to play this line well will make every other heavy fighter line in the game much easier to play, because
Yeah.
this is they're very strong guns, tier for tier, strong guns all the way down. And because they're not very maneuverable, once you play, something like the American or the minuscule Japanese that there are in the game, those are going to seem like almost easy mode just because you've got some maneuverability, but you've got so much more airspeed with these planes that you don't necessarily have all the time consistently on the other line. So for me, I just think these are a very strong tier for tier, some of the strongest planes in the game.
Yeah.
If you learn to play the tactics properly.
Yeah. I was going to say that it's almost the essential heavy line, especially as I was saying before about getting ruined by the first 262. If you don't know what these planes are about, you're going to hate running into them. So it's definitely worth spending a bit of time and getting to know them.
Well, and they're strong because you learn those tactics, right? Like when we were first playing the game, you run into an ME-410 and you're like, oh my God, that plane just friggin', I'm out of hit points.
Yeah.
But the first time I hopped in a 410, it wasn't like just suddenly knocking people out of the sky, right? There's nuances to each plane on this line, and those nuances can take you from being a mediocre plane or a mediocre pilot in a mediocre plane to, a good pilot in a good plane.
Yeah, I think we chose, like, refresh my memory if I'm wrong, but I think we chose this line because we had covered the Americans because we felt like there was people that were going down the American light fighter line that probably shouldn't have been as their initial go, but we also wanted to show people that it's not a bad line, it's just a difficult line to go down. I think with this line, more our message is this is heavy fighters. This is how you learn how to fly them. This is very consistent performance. Like, the way they fly stays the same all the way through. And if you can figure this out, it'll make you better at altitude fighters. It'll make you better at heavy fighters. You'll get the boom and zoom tactic way better.
Yeah.
And there's so much to be learned. Plus, they're beautiful planes.
That
True,
they
true.
are.
These are like the New York City of heavy fighters. If you can make it here, you can make it any.
it's so cheesy. Oh, all right. With that said, thanks for watching, guys. Thanks from Veebat over at Vplays, and thanks from Postal Monkey and Avalation for getting together. It took us nearly a month to link up to do this, so we've had our video footage sitting in the archive for a while.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'll be able to turn this out a little bit quicker. But thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, had a blast. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks guys. Cheers.